Hello and welcome to yet another video, and in this video it is something a little bit different but also quite exciting, at least for me, because I'll be talking about this camera right here. It's one of my favorite cameras that I have and own, and use as well. It's the Holga 120 Panoramic Camera. That's a mouthful name to say, but it's actually been a very fun camera to use personally, and a camera that I took it to a lot of places in the past few weeks because I really only have it for the past few weeks, but I already really enjoy it, and it's such a simple camera to use that you don't really have to think a lot in terms of like if the battery is running out or not, but you're just gonna be there you know, thinking about the film that you have, but mainly about the composition that you'll have. And after you shoot, you just put the camera away, and it's just a very refreshing and relaxing camera to use and take pictures of. So in this video, it's not going to be a full review video. It's just going to be a video about my opinions on this camera based on how I shot with it. So in case it actually might help some of you out. And yeah, without further ado, let's get into the video. So the Holga 120 Pan, or the Panoramic Camera, this camera has been out for quite a while now, I know, but it wasn't until like last month when I actually know about this camera. I actually talked about the normal Holga last year, in fact, the 120N. Now this camera also came out a long time ago. It's kind of like based on the Diana cameras, things like that, and they're both lomography kind of cameras, but still they're actually very fun, and the results that you get aren't always consistent, but that's kind of like the fun of it. And a lot of photographers did use it and still use this camera for their professional aesthetics, just to have some sort of different unique results that they can get and also deliver to their clients as well. And personally, I really do see the charm of using this camera. Not only that, the process of using this camera is very simplistic and there's a charm to that, but also the actual characteristics that's coming out of the images has some sort of character and charm to it that, you know, I personally quite like as well. And before I dive into the video, I have to say that I think I also got kind of lucky with this particular camera as well, because unlike many other Holgas that I heard about, at least my Holgas, it feels kind of weird to say that, my Holga cameras hasn't really been experiencing a lot of light leaks, so I can actually go out without taping up or sealing up all these little gaps at the back and also on the sides and things like that. So yeah, and also the lens quality isn't rubbish. Of course it's not the best, and it's not, you know, sharp, but the aesthetics that I get, or the characteristics from the lens that I get on the images, I actually quite like them. And if you know the lens limitations, you can always use them to your advantage, or just kind of like use them to your strength. I don't know how to really say that, just yeah, to your own benefit. Anyway, in this video, I'll be dividing it into 3 different sections as usual. The first one is the ergonomics and the usability, and then following by the image quality, and then leading down into the conclusion, why I recommend it and why I don't recommend it. So let's first start with the actual ergonomics and the usability. This camera is built very, very plasticky, and I, to be honest, have handled much cheaper film cameras that does more for a lot less price. But of course, this camera being a panoramic camera, that is its, you know, huge selling point that a lot of film cameras just don't do. This one here, you know, as you can see from the back, it actually takes 120 film, but you can actually put in an adapter, and they do actually give you an adapter to put in different film format in there. But because I only shoot with 120 film, being my favorite film format, I don't put an adapter in here, but you can always experiment with the Sprox kind of films. And after this video, I will definitely lend this camera to a friend of mine who likes to shoot with Sprox kind of film effects, things like that. So it'll also be interesting to see how my friend will achieve the results with this particular camera. But aside from the super plastic quality, it doesn't feel super cheap. Like, it doesn't try to creak when you try to squeeze them, but just be sure that you're also not dropping it here and there, because it is plastic and it does feel very plasticky. But I do appreciate that they actually put in metal screw mounts for the tripod mount, so that's at least pretty good. But otherwise, the operation on here is very simple, very basic. After you load in the film, you lock the latches, and at least with my particular copy, the door doesn't fall off. And of course, back here you can actually take a look at how many shots you have left. And talking about how many shots you have left, always roll further than you usually would do on a normal camera, because remember, this is taking almost twice the length that you usually would shoot with something like, for example, the Mamiya 645 that I have. I would have to, roll it extra long, or wind it extra long. But this camera also provides you with the level up here, which is actually quite handy if you're into landscape photography or shooting architecture or cityscapes, things like that needs some sort of leveling. And it's always nice to have the aid up here just for you to know the level, because the viewfinder up here that you have isn't what you're gonna get here. It's just a rough approximate that what you're going to be getting out of this 90mm lens. It is a bit different than the traditional 120N Holgas, because this one is 60mm versus 90mm, but you are getting a much wider panoramic film out of this particular camera, so that's actually quite nice as well. And around the lens here, there is a simple focusing distance up here. The rule being, well, roughly speaking, the rule being one person is just 1 meter away, and then you go up into between 2 to 3 meters, and then you go up to 6 to 7 meters, and then anything above 10 meters you go to the mountain range, or mountain icon. So yeah, and also up here you also have switched between 2 aperture settings, like sunset and bright sunlight, depending on the lighting outside. And there's an actual lens in here that kind of move up and down, one's smaller and one's bigger, but yeah, just to control how much light is let through the lens, or the iris, or the aperture of this particular lens. And yeah, but otherwise the lens is indeed plastic, so there is that character to it as well, if you're into that. If you manage to focus correctly, in most cases you will get really tack sharp images, but more about that in the image quality section. And then on the side you have the shutter kind of actuation, or the shutter button, which is directly close to the lens for obvious reasons, because, well, it's just coupled there, and it's just easier to build it here, simply because if they have to put it up here, there would be more mechanism going down there, and the cost would be definitely higher as well, and there would be more points of failure if they had to extend it all the way up here to the body itself. No complaints, but just that sometimes when you're taking pictures handheld, using this action can actually kind of cause more shakiness as well. And the shutter speed, from what I read, is only around 60th of a second. Now, I also read somewhere that's also around 90th of a second, so I'm not sure, but just take it as a worst case scenario, being a 60th of a second camera. It is good enough to freeze general moving objects, but you will still see slight motion blur here and there as well, so just be careful about that. And the aperture, from what I read, is anywhere between f9 and f13. It's a huge range, and yes, there are websites that tells you the more specific aperture, but I also don't know how accurate that is, because I mean, I haven't tested it really in terms of how precise the aperture blade or the aperture is, but just a rule of thumb, just try to remember between f9 and f13. That could also just be a nice way to kind of calculate the lighting in your head as well, depending on which film you use. And talking about film, there is a recommendation here that you should use around ISO 400 and a film temperature of around 27 degrees Celsius, but I don't keep that as a precise rule. Sometimes I use ISO 200, sometimes I use ISO 400 in this particular camera. And since the temperature here, right now it's summer, it has been between 20 to 32 degrees, I can just safely say it's at some point the film will be at around 27 degrees Celsius as well, so there is that. But yeah, otherwise everything on here is very very straightforward. You also have your shutter speed down here that you can switch from, you know, a normal not bulb of around either 60th of a second or 90th of a second to around bulb. So as long as you hold this, it will continue to open up that shutter speed, that shutter curtain, until you let go of it, and back to N, which is not bulb, for a normal kind of shutter shooting experience. Then you have two cold shoes up here, which is actually quite nice, and a normal winder, which makes this really weird sound, but it actually also assures that you are actually winding something, so that's also quite nice. And yeah, otherwise there's not really much to talk about apart from it just, you know, being kind of like a plasticky feeling brick, but it is still a light camera, so be careful how you pack this camera, and not to be too rough with it as well. So yeah, now moving on to the image quality. The image quality out of this camera, well, mainly just the optical quality rather, it is quite soft on the corners and quite sharp in the center. It is a plastic lens, but I feel like because it is considered as somewhat of like a toy camera, I don't really take it super clinically seriously. It is a sharp enough image. If you're just going to be viewing it on your large monitors, like on your iMac, things like that, you will still see softness, but it's kind of like a normal softness that you can accept, that it is its own character, that you can accept as part of its own aesthetics, rather than, let's say, you buy a really expensive lens that you expect it to perform really nicely and it just turns out to be very soft, like mashed potato, for example. That's a different story. But with this softness, it's actually a nice aesthetics to it. It's somewhat like pleasing to the eyes. You know that it's still sharp, but the softness just kind of like eliminate a lot of the unnecessary details, I would like to say. But if you like everything to be super sharp, then maybe this lens is not for you. But everything is sharp enough that it doesn't bring out the unwanted details. But around the corners, you will still see the softness around more pronounced. So that is to be expected, but that's also normal coming from like a camera like this, or of this caliber, things like that. But otherwise, the color fringing, at least with my particular copy of the camera, it's actually pretty well controlled. Of course, it is still there depending on the subject that you shoot with, the type of contrast, the distance away from the subject, and the subject away from the high contrast backgrounds or scenarios. But for the price, it is really well controlled. But you know, for the type of camera, I'm also not too serious on the color fringing. It is there, but very minimal in my opinion and experience. So yeah, there's that. And of course, being a film camera, this also depends on which film you have in here, that, you know, dictates the look and the vibe of the actual image. If you calculate everything to be, you know, well calculated, it will deliver really nice images, one that you can actually compare to some of the actual medium format cameras as well, assuming you have good lighting, assuming you set your scenes nicely, or actually you're in that good moment where everything just works technically sound to make that good images as well. But otherwise, the character out of this camera is also very nostalgic, very fun, kind of very 90s, or yeah, very early 90s, mid 90s Hong Kong kind of look that I'm getting out of this camera, which is something that I really love. So yeah, there is that. There are imperfections, as I mentioned, but overall I really love the character out of this camera, and one that I have been, you know, enjoying to use for the past few weeks that I have it. I don't always use it because using film, 120 film in this camera can be very expensive. Not can be, it is very expensive, because, you know, you're only getting between 6 to 7 shots, between 6 or 7 shots, because it is a wide format, and also the cost of developing and scanning can also be very expensive. You can of course develop it at home as well, but for me, I don't really have time or patience to always develop all of my films at home, so I do send it to professional labs. And here in the Netherlands, developing and scanning is very expensive. at like a professional place where I get it for develop and scan. It's with my discount, I get it around between 15 to 19 euros develop and scan. Whereas in Thailand, where I also send it to a professional developing place, and it's already considered as expensive in Thailand, that place, because only professionals really go there, or people who just wants their film to be developed very well and scans very professionally. You know, I'm coming from that price range of around between 3 or 4 euros versus around between 15 to 19 euros here in the Netherlands. It can be very expensive, not to mention the film cost, or the cost of actually getting a film in this camera as well. So yeah, there's that. Now heading down into the conclusion, as I'm slowly diving off topic. I overall still recommend this camera if you want to experiment with this sort of like wide aspect ratio camera, because it does not force you, but like gives you a different perspective that kind of makes you frame the images a little bit differently, maybe more cinematically in some aspects as well. And this wide aspect ratio I really love so much. I always love images when they're like 3:2, 16:9, things like that. I don't like images when it's like 1:1, 4:3, like what I usually get 4:3 from my, let's say, Fuji GFX cameras, things like that, because I don't like them. Not that I don't like them, actually, it's more like I don't have the knowledge or the capability to always frame good compositions with those aspect ratios, so to speak. Because some of my favorite photographers have framed or actually have produced a lot of images that I love with just 1:1 or 4:3. Yeah, so it's not my aspect ratio, but I love the wide aspect ratio that this camera has, or that the normal 35mm cameras has, things like that. So yeah, there is that. Otherwise, this camera is a very light camera. It's actually quite cheap as well if you consider other panoramic cameras that can start at around 2 grand or 4 grand, things like that. I just cannot justify paying for, let's say, an X-Pan. I love the quality and the look out of the X-Pan, but I just cannot justify the price tag of it, especially when I don't shoot with those cameras on a daily basis, and won't be shooting with those cameras on a daily basis even if I have them, because my main cameras will always still be, at least for the foreseeable future, my R5, R6, the A7 IV that's filming me, the A7C, things like that. So those are still my main cameras. It's just that, you know, for experimentation cameras or for just fun cameras, I feel like you cannot really go wrong with this Holga 120 panoramic camera. It is very simple. The mechanism in here is also very simple. There's nothing complicated about it, so it won't really break down on that front. Yeah, overall it's a fun camera to try out. That being said, if you're a person who likes to have like a clinically clean outcome where the lenses should be very sharp and you would like to actually change lenses, things like that, then this camera is definitely not for you. This is just for if you know your own aesthetics, and if this could fit into your own aesthetics, or just want to experiment panoramic kind of look film camera, then this camera is a nice camera and also a fun camera to experiment and try out as well. Otherwise, that's it for this video. If you have any questions, any suggestions, feel free to just leave them down in the comment section below. If you need a free photography guidebook, it's absolutely for free on my website. The link is down in the description section below. So as some of my video courses up there as well, I do have free ones already available on my website as well, so feel free to just check them out as well. Otherwise, if you have anything to share, any stories to share, feel free to also comment down in the comment section below as well. Otherwise, I thank you all very much again for watching. I wish you all a great time. Stay safe, have fun shooting. Till next time, bye for now.